morning, Warsaw! Today it's Wednesday, 16th of August. It will be cloudy with sunny spells with highs of 16 degrees Celsius or 60 degrees Fahrenheit for our American listeners. Sunrise will be at 5:36 a.m. and sunset at 8:16 p.m. We are on the 16th day of the Warsaw Uprising. Inhumane weapons are being used against the insurgents. Claire will explain more on that subject a little later. But what else is going on during the uprising?
Thanks for that intro, Philippe. Yes, there are some inhumane weapons going on, and Claire will tell us about that. But first of all, let's start with what's happening on the ground. Claire, where are we with this?
We are just over 2 weeks since the Warsaw Uprising was launched. And when they started, they thought they were going to have to hold out for, well, they hoped just 2 days would bring victory. But they were prepared. They'd done preparations. They'd got banks of food, stashes of arms, ammunition. They were prepared to hold out for 2 weeks. And we're now 2 days past that. And there are real cracks in the partisans' plan. One of the key things, well, there's many things. One of them is there are loads of civilians still in Warsaw. And every evening they are now emerging from their cellars, their basements, to see what has changed on the landscape, to scavenge for food and supplies, and to exchange news with each other, and also to share some sort of sense of solidarity. So you get these stories of neighbours coming together to sing songs together and whispering prayers. And of course, like everything else, grief is shared as well. There's now quite a huge mortality. And there are rows of bodies in the streets covered with newspaper before burial. They are respectfully buried, but they're often placed in collective graves. And there is growing fears about disease at this point. So as people walk around in the evenings, they can hear the buzzing of blue bottles in the ruins, and they can smell that horrible, very heavy death smell in the smoky summer heat in the evenings. So we're already worried about contagious diseases spreading across the city. And then there's another problem. As you said a couple of days ago, the Germans have seized the water filter stations, and the population of Warsaw is running out of fresh water. And the water conduits are polluted as well. And so they now start digging wells at a huge rate in backyards, in tenement buildings, all the way across the city. And they need groups of women. Now, Zoe, who I have been talking about a few times, Elżbieta Zawadzka, is one of the female resistance fighters, and her role is in supply of increasingly of water, also of food and other supplies. And medicines as well. And so she now joins the relays. They have these big teams of women who have metal buckets that they'd already prepared. They've got things like this organised. And they're going across the city between these freshly dug wells to bring the water to the field hospitals. And they're doing it at night, but they're also doing it during the day. I mean, there is such huge need, and without an effective built-in water system, they are constantly working. And so remembered the constant air raids all the time, even at night, when they are trying to take water in these pails. And on one occasion, she recalled that she was carrying a bucket to the next woman down the line when suddenly her dress was soaked. She was soaked through to the skin and terrified. You know, she looked down expecting to see blood, but her bucket had been shot through and the bullet had just missed her, and she was just covered in water from the bucket she had been carrying. But, you know, it brings home they're doing this under those conditions. So that's the sort of, you know, it's almost constant now. We hardly need to say it, that as they are doing this supply work, as they're doing their fighting, they are under constant attack. So perhaps, Alina, can you tell us about one of those attacks that is undertaken on the 16th of August?
Yeah, I specifically wanted to tell this story because I feel a bit of a connection to both of the poets who end up getting killed in this action. Both of them were 22 years old. One is Tadeusz Gajcy and the other one is Zbigniew Leon Stroński. And they're not the only poets to perish and died during the Warsaw Uprising. There are a lot of academics, very well educated people, artists, all sorts are fighting for their country at this stage. But the two of them were in a building just in the south of Warsaw, in a tenement building, and around noon, German explosive engineers basically blow up the 5-story tenement house which they were in, and they were both buried underneath the rubble. These two men were so active during the occupation. They took part in various information and propaganda actions, and they loved their country, and their poetry is still alive today. So if you are quite interested, I'd recommend going to read some of their poetry. It's been translated into English, and they're both buried together at Powązki Military Cemetery. So, but that's not the only action, though. Roger, there's another one, isn't there?
Yes, there's an interesting action took place on the 16th, just to the north of the old town. It was a German strong point. It was known as the Red House, which was attacked by units of the Armia Ludowa, which was the People's Army, which was the communist underground. And as you'll remember, under the German occupation, there were all shades of political thought were represented in the underground. In general, and there were many of those political groupings, had their own sort of paramilitary arm, and the communists were one of those as well. Of course, they didn't generally collaborate with what became the Home Army, because they were loyal to Moscow, so they generally sort of ploughed their own furrow. But the People's Army, the AL, Armia Ludowa, they did also carry out some actions during the Warsaw Rising. So this is one of those. And it was carried out as a sort of a classic feint. So they approached the building from one direction, and at the same time set booby traps at the rear of the building, which were then set off when the attack subsided. And actually, caused the building to partially collapse, and in the process, large numbers of the German soldiers that were in there were killed, and many others fled. So it was quite a successful operation, but notable because it was primarily because it was carried out by the Armia Ludowa, by the communists.
So this is an action happening near the old town. Claire, you've got some more information about what's actually happening in the old town at this point.
The old town is a constant source of action, and I'm afraid to say of horror as well, because there are a number of atrocities taking place there. The Germans are now using their bit of new kit, the Nebelwerfer. I hope I got that right, Roger. And these are multiple rocket launchers, and pretty indiscriminate in what they're taking out. And in fact, Zoe, the woman that I've written about, witnesses an attack by a Nebelwerfer. She said they emitted a blood-curdling moan as they fired these successive volleys of demolition and incendiary missiles towards them. The sound of them was so striking going off that the Poles called them the bellowing cows. And Zoe then saw a number of friends, colleagues from her unit, whose skin was burning, set on fire by this kit. And she said they were absolutely mad with pain, and they ran towards her and then threw themselves in a pond, a firewater pond, a pond that had been dug specifically to put out fires. They threw themselves in there, but of course that only eased their immediate pain, and they had to go straight to a field hospital. She herself, horrified by this, she grabbed a stretcher with a friend and then ran in the opposite direction, so straight towards the fire, through smouldering heaps of rubble, across roads where they knew the Germans had snipers at the top of various buildings, but she'd seen a casualty in the street. It was another friend of hers, Alina, who was the commander of the Pomeranian district of the Polish Red Cross, and she had been shot in the stomach. And Zoe and her friend managed to get her on the stretcher and bring her back. Unfortunately, she died soon afterwards, but at least not alone lying in the street. Zoe just said, at this point, the whole sky was red, and it was literally hell.
It's a very powerful quote there, Claire. I just want to add one more thing about the Nebelwerfer, where there are testimonies from insurgents that took, let's say, a few percent of some of the phosphorus liquid onto their skin, and it literally burnt. They said it was one of the most horrific experiences they had. And the same guy who had this, he had it all over his back. He also witnessed a few of his friends who also got hit, and they jumped into a reservoir of water that they were using as a way of putting out fires. These people just kept burning it under the water, and unfortunately they died that way. This was one of the most feared weapons during the Warsaw Uprising. There was also one placed in the University of Warsaw, but we'll get to that in a couple of days' time when we talk more about that. But otherwise, yeah, one of the most worst and feared weapons during the uprising. So we talked about what's been happening on the ground. We should really touch on what's been happening on the air. And Roger, that's going to be your bit here. What's happening?
Yeah, so the airdrops are continuing to Warsaw. The Allies are increasingly using Campinos Forest, which is off to the northwest of Warsaw, which is territory that which has actually. I mean, throughout the occupation, the forests of Poland were very often sort of strongholds of the underground army, and Campinos which is just outside the capital, was no exception. And as the areas within the city that were held by the insurgents had shrunk by this point, the Allied Air Force is increasingly using Campinos as a sort of target for their airdrops. On the night of 15th to 16th, so 9 aircraft had arrived over Warsaw. Only 4 actually returned, so it shows you the loss rates. And that same night, so 16th to 17th, the night that we're talking about now, a further 5 aircraft are lost, 2 Polish and 2 South African, all of which were trying to supply canisters to the Campinos Forest. Just to give a taste of the sort of human cost of all of that, of those 5 aircraft, I mean, all of which had crews of 6 individuals generally. There's only 1 South African survivor from that, and there are 4 Polish survivors from 1 Halifax. There was 1 Halifax and 4 liberators. So the 4 Polish survivors were all taken prisoner. And I mean, that shows you the loss rates, and that it's a mixture of anti-aircraft fire and often of German night fighters as well. So very often those aircraft were lost with all hands on board, which is of course tragic. So very costly night in the skies above Warsaw.
Well, it's a bit of a short one today. Thanks so much for joining us. We will see you back again tomorrow for day 17. And sorry to keep some of these so short. You've got to remember, we've got 65 of these podcasts to go through, and not everybody's going to want to listen to it every day. So we're making them short and sweet and bite-sized, and hoping that you want to know more about the Warsaw Uprising. So remember, head to your favourite platform, give us a 5-star rating, then more people will be just as lucky as you to be able to listen to our podcast. Thanks so much, everyone.